Hello, and welcome to FAFSA Bootcamp Part 1. Today we'll be talking about the first step to completing the FAFSA, which is StudentAid.Gov Account Creation. A quick overview of the agenda of this training. First, we're going to provide some 26-27 FAFSA news and updates. Next, we'll talk about financial aid basics and cover why students should file the FAFSA, a common question we get in the field, as well as walking through the steps to creating a StudentAid.Gov account for both the student who's applying for federal student aid and their parent or required contributor when applicable. To start, we're going to cover 26-27 FAFSA news so that you all can understand how to navigate this year's FAFSA timelines and share some updates from FSA. We're happy to report that things continue to move smoothly, and we've seen improvements from last year, which was certainly an improvement from the year before. The 26-27 FAFSA will be released to all students by October 1st, 2025. This is a return to the release date that had become pretty standard in financial aid, but hasn't been the last few years as there have been some delays with the FAFSA form. So we're really excited this form is back to being available early to students. FSA is currently conducting beta testing with students. They began in August with some select states and got positive feedback, as well as identified a few things to be updated and fixed. And they'll continue this beta testing through October and the launch. Currently, they are in beta 2 testing. For this part, any student can request to participate. There's a link to an access page on the FAFSA website that students who are excited and eager to start can request to be included on the wait list and complete their FAFSA early. They can participate now. One thing to note is that it is still beta testing, so there may still be some bugs or things that are being worked out. So while we've heard positive feedback, and for many students, the experience has been really positive. That is something worth noting that starting early may mean that they run into a couple more bugs than students who start October 1st. However, if a student enters into beta 2 and completes their 26-27 form now, it's a real form and they'll be done. They'll be able to complete their FAFSA form earlier than ever. Um, Still, the real FAFSA, or the official launch date is set for October 1st. The 26-27 FAFSA will have fewer changes compared to last year's form and certainly the year before that. A few key changes, or two of them. The first one we'll talk about more in depth today. It's more impactful to the account creation process, and that is faster verification for StudentAid.Gov account creation. In the past, users had to wait 1 to 3 days for their ID to be verified by the Social Security Administration. That's been adjusted to be an instant verification process. So a student or contributor will be able to create their account and on the same day complete their FAFSA, even accessing their tax data on automatically being able to retrieve it. So we're really excited about this prospect, particularly for those of you hosting FAFSA nights, for students or parents who come and are creating their account the same day. The next key change is an easier process for inviting contributors to the form. A lot of times for high school seniors, that's parents, but for adult students, that may be inviting a spouse. And so we won't be talking about that process today, but tune in to our part 2 deep dive of the FAFSA training if you're interested in learning more about that process, as well as a full walkthrough of the FAFSA. Some planning ideas for students, or excuse me, for high schools or community-based organizations who are hosting FAFSA events and preparing for those. We really want to continue to encourage students to think about paying for college as hand in hand with applying for college. The first step to going to college is, of course, applying to be admitted somewhere. But really quickly, an essential step becomes figuring out how to pay for it. And so pairing those events, a FAFSA event or a StudentAid.Gov account creation event with a Utah College Application Week, or a Paying for College night or workshop can be really beneficial for students and help them progress through the steps of being able to access higher education. In the past, there's been more delays, right? And so many of these events have focused in the fall on creating an account and then in the spring on creating the FAFSA. They may be able to happen all at once this year. So be creative and don't be afraid to go back or think back to um, a time when there weren't FAFSA delays and how you did things, then maybe revisit some of those practices. Next, we'll talk about financial aid basics so that you'll be able to better understand and articulate to students and families why they should complete the FAFSA. So first, some real basics. What is the FAFSA? It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is a gateway to many financial aid and scholarship opportunities. In particular, this application qualifies students for federal aid, but we'll talk about on the next few slides how it also can impact access to other scholarships and aid opportunities. FAFSA can be the first step that students take to help cover their college costs. High school students apply starting October 1st. They'll want to make sure they're applying for the next academic year. So for the class of 2026, they'll be completing the 26-27 FAFSA starting October 1st. And then they'll also need to complete the FAFSA every year that they're in college. So that's something important to remember that any student who wants to or needs to continue receiving that financial aid will need to complete a new form each year. Students go to StudentAid.Gov to get started. So a question we often hear is, why should I complete the FAFSA? And it really is a part of the puzzle of paying for college. As I mentioned before, the FAFSA itself is a direct application for federal student aid, so it allows students access to grants, work study opportunities, and student loans. And we'll talk about that a bit in depth on the next slide. It can also allow students access to state aid and scholarships or institutional aid and scholarships at all different types of colleges, from technical colleges, community colleges, to universities. And we'll talk about each of those on a few slides as well. And FAFSA can also be a component in accessing private scholarships. So it really is an essential piece to be able to unlock a lot of different aid opportunities to help students make the cost of college a little bit more accessible. So Title IV aid, or federal financial aid that students can qualify for by completing the FAFSA, include federal student loans. So students can qualify for a subsidized or unsubsidized loan. A subsidized loan means that the interest doesn't begin to accrue until after the student completes college, as long as they remain enrolled at least half time. And so subsidies or being able to qualify for a subsidized loan is dependent on financial need. The unsubsidized loan, where interest begins to accrue immediately, is available to any student who completes the FAFSA. You'll also hear us talking a bit about a dependent versus an independent student for purposes of the FAFSA. Dependent students are required to report their parents' information on the form. For most high school seniors, they are considered dependent students. There are some individual circumstances that are considered, and we'll talk about those a bit more on a later slide and much more in depth on our FAFSA deep dive. And then on the end here, you can see what the maximum amounts a student can qualify for based on their dependent status, as well as whether it's a subsidized loan or not, each academic year. And a really important thing to note is that federal student loans, even if a student qualifies for it through the FAFSA, they're absolutely not required to accept it. In fact, we strongly encourage students to explore other options first, other gift aid like grants or scholarships, or work study and saving for college before they explore loans. However, they can be an important investment and tool for students who need a little bit more help to be able to cover all of their costs. So it's something worth remembering that even if a student completes a FAFSA and is offered a federal student loan, they do not have to accept it. We do generally encourage students to explore federal student loans before private loans, though. The other kind of big piece of the FAFSA that's well known is the Pell Grant. Students who complete the FAFSA and who demonstrate financial need are eligible for a Pell Grant. The Pell Grant, unlike loans, is gift aid, so students do not have to repay it. It's applied to them through their college or university toward academic costs. The current maximum Pell Grant amount is just over $7,000, and it is subject to change annually. The final option of federal student aid that I think is often forgotten in the FAFSA process is access to work study opportunities. Students who complete the FAFSA can qualify to be able to be a work study student on campus. So if a student sees this, they'll see the full offer of money that they're able to receive as a maximum on their offer letter. They'll work with their college or university to be able to apply for a job on campus, and then they'll be able to earn that money as they work through a paycheck on campus jobs. The really cool thing about work study opportunities is that students are able to work generally more flexible hours. Their employers know that they're also students juggling busy schedules. And so sometimes during a particularly stressful time like finals, they can have even more flexibility when working on campus. And most of the jobs are also on campus or nearby. So for students that are living on campus or nearby, their commute can be shorter, which can make it easier when they're juggling a schedule of going to class as well as trying to work. Um, so these are all the federal aid opportunities students can qualify for by completing the FAFSA. Moving into state aid, we'll talk through three examples, but there are many state scholarships. Most of them, in fact, require students to complete a FAFSA. So for the Promise Scholarship, it is our state need-based aid for students. The colleges identify candidates, but the FAFSA information from the FAFSA is used to determine which students demonstrate financial need to qualify for this award on each campus. Students don't have to complete a separate application. Simply completing the FAFSA is all that's required. And then the institution will automatically package it as part of their financial aid offer to help students be able to cover college costs. So it's a great additional aid opportunity for students who have completed the FAFSA, who demonstrate financial need. It could be students who have higher financial need, but there's also a consideration for those students who have completed the FAFSA. Maybe they don't qualify for a full Pell Grant, but they still have need some help to pay for college costs, and the Promise Scholarship can help cover those. The Opportunity Scholarship is an academic or merit scholarship. It's the biggest in our state. Students apply through our office for this scholarship, and FAFSA is required as part of the application process. However, the results of the FAFSA, whether a student qualifies for federal financial aid, whether they accept federal financial aid or not, whether they demonstrate financial need, does not impact their eligibility for the Opportunity Scholarship. It's incorporated as a tool to help students be able to access all financial aid opportunities available to them. The last program I'll talk about here in this state aid category is the Technical Education Scholarship. This program is awarded to students who are enrolled in a technical education program that leads to a job that is in high demand in our state and pays high wages. As part of this application process, students apply at their college for this scholarship, and FAFSA is a requirement, but it doesn't impact their eligibility, so it's not a need-based award. This scholarship in particular, as a few of our state aid programs, allow a student to opt out of the FAFSA for a series of approved reasons. So this is an important one to consider for students who maybe are hesitant to complete a FAFSA. They can still qualify for scholarships, but it is an additional step to be able to opt out. And so being able to complete the FAFSA can help students access these other scholarships provided by state funding as well as the federal funding they may qualify for by completing a FAFSA. And finally, institutional aid. Similar to state aid, students can qualify for need-based scholarships that many colleges offer that do require FAFSA completion and help students who do demonstrate financial need. But there's also, again, similar to state scholarships, many non-need-based scholarships that opportunities that require FAFSA completion, but are not awarded based on financial need. So a couple of examples, Utah State Eastern has over 70 non-need-based scholarships that require FAFSA completion. Davis Technical College requires FAFSA completion for any scholarship for students on their campus. So again, it's just a great tool that just reiterating that notion that FAFSA is a gateway into lots of aid opportunities to help make the cost of college a little bit more manageable for students. Finally, I just wanted to cover what the Student Aid Index is, or SAI. It replaced the Expected Family Contribution, or EFC, number a few years ago, so it represents a slightly different calculation. But essentially, it is a an index of the student's financial need. So the results of this are displayed at the end of the FAFSA for a student to see what their SAI is. It doesn't represent what the student or family is expected to pay for college. The net price calculator could be used to better help students understand what their college costs will look like and what aid they may qualify for. If you haven't checked out our updated Facts at a Glance on our websites, which I'll point out at the end as resources, I encourage you to do so. It helps. Each college or university has their own net price calculator that helps students calculate a more individualized estimate of what their college costs will look like. But the SAI is calculated, and the result is between negative 1,500 and 99,999, giving student an estimate of what their financial need looks like. Any SAI of 0 or below allows students to access the full Pell Grant amount and often other need-based aid opportunities. So the lower the SAI, the greater the student's financial need, which increases their likelihood of being able to qualify for those other need-based aid programs. However, students who have an SAI above 0 can still qualify for a partial Pell Grant and other need-based aid as well. The indication is that there is less financial need than those students that are below a 0, and so on. Okay, now I'll walk through the steps of creating a StudentAid.Gov account so that you can help parents and students successfully create their account before they're ready to complete their FAFSA. So we'll start with who needs to create an account. You'll hear us talking often, or maybe you've already noticed that I'm referring to a student and the required contributor. And the contributor is anyone who's asked or required to provide information on the student's FAFSA form. So each student has to have their own account in order to complete their FAFSA. If the student is married and they filed their taxes separately, their spouse will have to have a StudentAid.Gov account as well. That's probably less applicable to most high school students that counselors are reaching out to, but if you're at a community event or talking to an adult learner, that's something worth noting. For many students who are high school seniors, like we mentioned before, they'll be considered dependent students. And so their parent, their biological or adoptive parent, will need to have their own StudentAid.Gov account in order to complete their part of the FAFSA. An important thing to note is not only who a contributor is, but who a contributor is not. So there are some special circumstances that require a student, or that allow a student to be deemed as an independent student for purposes of the FAFSA, and they're the only one who needs to sign it. However, if a contributor never includes a grandparent, a foster parent, a legal guardian, a brother or sister, aunt or uncle, or any other person who is not a biological or adoptive parent of the student. If the parent has created an account in the past, they don't need to create a second one. In fact, they won't be able to. So maybe if a student has older siblings and the parent was a contributor to their older siblings' FAFSA, or if the parent, when they attended college, completed the FAFSA form themselves, they may already have a StudentAid.Gov account that they'll be able to use to create their FAFSA, or to be a contributor on their student's FAFSA. If parent has an old account, they don't know how to access it, they'll want to reach out to FSA directly. There's an information help center that will be able to help them access that, as well as some links on the FAFSA website to help them walk through that. So continuing with a parent, figuring out who needs to sign the FAFSA can be kind of tricky. So a question we often receive is, do both parents need to create an account and sign the student's FAFSA? And the answer is, it depends. So both parents need an account for a dependent student if the parents are not married, but they're living together, or if they're married or remarried and filed their taxes as married filed separately. As a quick reminder for the 26-27 FAFSA, students and parents should be looking at their prior taxes. So they'll be looking at 2024 tax information to determine that married filed separately status. Only one parent needs an account if the dependent student, for a dependent student, if the parent is single, they've never been married, or if they're widowed. If they're married or remarried and filed their taxes as married filed jointly, again for the 26-27 year, that would be looking back at tax year 2024. Or if the parent is divorced or separated and they have not remarried. Something important to note is that in the FAFSA previously, there's been a Who is My Parent Wizard tool included, and all students had to complete those questions. This year, for simplicity and then further attempt to shorten the form, those questions are not required for everyone to complete. However, on the FAFSA form, there will be a link to their tool, and it's a standalone tool that helps students determine which parent needs to complete the FAFSA. If you simply look up Who is my parent on the FAFSA, the Parent Wizard tool will pop up and help students walk through a series of questions and determine which parent needs to complete the FAFSA form, particularly in cases where their parents are separated or divorced and they have not. And they need some more help figuring out who needs to complete the form. Okay, so here's the StudentAid.Gov account creation. We'll start process overview. We'll start going straight across the top row if for users that have a social security number. So if the answer to that is yes, they'll move and enter their information, and the information will be checked against the Social Security Administration for a match. If there is not a match, the user will be able to update their information or contact the Social Security Administration to resolve the issue. In most cases, though, there is a match and they're able to have their identity verified automatically right away. Um, Oftentimes, an error here, and we'll talk about this in a few slides again, but an error here is entering the wrong social security number, birthday, or entering something incorrectly about their name, often a nickname. So just being careful to enter that information carefully here. So students who are ready to create their account or contributors who are excited to get started will go to StudentAid.gov. This is the direct link to the website, and they'll be able to, up in the top right corner, select to log in or create their account. Anyone can create an account, but they should only be used for students who are US citizens or eligible non-citizens who are applying for federal student aid. If you Google what is an eligible citizen for federal student aid or for FAFSA, there's some really helpful links directly from FSA that provide information about the statuses of students who are able to complete the form. This can also, the accounts should also be created for parents or spouse of a student who is applying for federal aid, regardless of if they have a social security number or not. Account creators will need a verified email. Students, we always want to remind them to avoid using their high school email, as their access to these emails will likely expire. And as we talked about at the start, students do need to complete the FAFSA every year to continue to be eligible. So to be able to access the account, they'll want to make sure they're using a personal email or one that they'll continue to have access to. They'll need accurate demographic information. Like I said, for the ID check to work correctly, the social security number and date of birth have to be correct. Make sure students are not, and parents are not entering a nickname, but actually entering their full legal name as it would appear on their social security card. And then they're also asked to provide a cell phone number. This is optional, but recommended. It's often used to send recovery or verification information via text message and help secure the account. So as students or their contributors get started, they'll enter in that demographic information, and then they'll be required to enable two-step verification to protect their account. Here, they'll be able to, like we said, enter their phone number that they'll verify and their email address that they'll be able to verify. They'll need access to those to be able to log into their account in the future. In the past, there's been an option to use an authenticator app. However, last year there were some bugs that they had, or a bug that they identified, FSA identified with the authenticator app that was causing issues with some accounts. We haven't heard an update, and we didn't know a lot of students who had been using that option. But just generally, we're recommending using the text or email verification option to be able to protect the account. Once they've enabled the two-step verification, a backup code will be generated and displayed on the screen. And so students or their parent or contributor should save the backup code somewhere safe. It's used to be able to access the account if a student is unable to, or contributor is unable to have use that phone number, email in the future. So some places we recommend is on a paper with taxes or in a phone and a secure app that is able to store passwords and sensitive information, or maybe in a folder for college passwords. Once you've stored the backup code in a safe space, then you'll get to this final part where your account is created. You'll see the screenshot is slightly outdated, and we've noted that here. All of our staff have StudentAid.Gov accounts, so we weren't able to recreate this screenshot again with the update. But the part that we noticed that's no longer accurate, as we've talked about a few times, is that waiting period for creating the account and having the identity be verified with SSA, the Social Security Administration. So parents and caregivers do not need to wait. It's an instant verification process. They should be able to move straight into completing the FAFSA form. Um, we do still encourage early account creation, even with this instant verification process in place. It's a way to get students excited and thinking about paying for college, but it also makes sure that they're prepared when they come to a FAFSA night to really get started. FAFSA eligibility for students with parents who do not have a Social Security number. A question we often hear is if students who are U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens, so they are able to qualify for federal student aid, but their parent does not have a Social Security number, what can they do? So to qualify for aid, the student's parent does need to create their own StudentAid.Gov account. There is a paper FAFSA form that's available, but it's strongly encouraged to do the online form for quicker processing and a simpler and a better experience in completing the FAFSA. And the parent can use the online form to provide their consent for the to use their information for the student's FAFSA. While nothing has changed as far as the laws go, we do want to always make sure that families that may be hesitant to share their personal information, um, that we validate those feelings. That FAFSA data is currently being protected by federal law and encrypted to ensure privacy. It's only being used to determine eligibility for federal and financial aid. However, policies and laws do change, and so families should carefully consider their comfort level and make informed decisions that feel right for them. So some additional steps do exist for parents without Social Security numbers. So we talked about that process at the top. So that would be for students, but also parents with Social Security numbers. If a parent is helping their student and they don't have a Social Security number, there's some different steps. So they'll start with some knowledge-based verification questions. If they answer those correctly, their ID can be verified. If not, they'll move to an ID proofing process before their ID can be verified. So, like I said, this is an example of the knowledge-based questions that populate. So after the two-step verification process, a series of questions will be populated using TransUnion Credit Bureau information to create personalized questions that have multiple choice answers. The user, to the best of their ability, answers those questions. If they answer them correctly, it'll automatically allow them to create their account and their identity will be considered verified. If not, they'll have to move through an ID proofing process. This process is one that happens through the Federal Student Aid Information Center. So for additional assistance, folks should reach out to them directly. Essentially, the contributor will be assigned a case number. They'll be required to fill out an attestation form and then provide some of the ID proof of IDs that are listed on this page before their account and ID identity can be verified to continue with the FAFSA. So for additional resources, we'll start with the UCAW and FAFSA webpage. This includes a lot of resources, particularly for professionals. We focus really on high school counselors and providing you with tools to be able to help your students through this process. So one of the things on there that you'll find is a StudentAid.Gov account creation tool and worksheet that allows students, walks them through the steps of creating, excuse me, creating their account, students and their contributor, and has a little card even that they can write their information on to be able to save their account login information as they'll need it many times as they progress through college. Um, there's also other materials generally about being able to pay for college, complete the FAFSA, or be able to apply for college and access college. We also have a YouTube channel that has great videos on there. There's a few from the 25-26 FAFSA that are still very applicable to this year, with a few exceptions, with things like the instant ID verification, not needing to wait 1 to 3 days. But the information in there can still be really helpful if that's a tool that you or parents or students find more easy than reading the text. We have some web pages dedicated to paying for college and for FAFSA help. And then we also will continue this bootcamp series. So we have several more trainings that will be available, either live if you've signed up or recordings on this web page. Next, we'll be doing a FAFSA deep dive, where we'll be walking through the entire FAFSA in depth and walking through a lot of the different, each of the different steps students and their parent, if they're a dependent student or contributor, will need to take to complete the FAFSA form. And then after that, there will also be a series of case study practices where you'll be able to practice some examples that draw from real life experiences and questions we've received about students and completing the FAFSA. So be able to get you some real practice. We'll be choosing one case study for each of those, beginning level, intermediate, and advanced level, to walk through those all together and answer some of the common questions. Finally, if you or your students have additional questions, we're here to help. While we can't answer specific questions about the FAFSA, we don't have access to that data, only FSA does. We're always here to help troubleshoot or answer questions as you or students walk through the process. And we are so grateful that you joined us today and listened in either live when we held this bootcamp number 1, or joining us virtually after that. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate your dedication to students and helping them, joining us in this journey to allow students, help them make the cost of college a little bit more manageable.